Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm Josh Brodesky. I'm the editorial page editor with the San Antonio Express News. I have two really interesting guests today, David Robinson Jr. and Beto Gomez. They're both with Urban Futures Lab, and we're here to talk about a really interesting op-ed project that we're launching that looks at South Texas's connection with Northern Mexico. We're calling it the South Texas Triangle or the South Triangle. And it's really trying to reorient our focus, right? As we look at how San Antonio fits in this region, right? We spent a lot of time talking about San Antonio and Austin, that growing corridor. Obviously, it's super important. Yep. But if we look south, there are some compelling reasons to look at our connections there and where we might go. So Beto and David, thanks for joining us today. And why don't you just kind of set the table with why you want San Antonians and people in South Texas to sort of look or think again about our connections to Monterrey, the Valley, and how to grow those and how those connections are formed.
So, thank you for having us, Josh. I think it's important to recognize the South region because of, a variety of factors, right? But I think one of the most important one is the current change in trends from globalization to, regionalism, which I think is something that is currently framing a lot of conversations that are happening, in the global scale. And so San Antonio has historically been a city of confluence, right? You can go back in history and, there's a spirit of the city that goes between the Mexican culture and the American culture, right? Between the United States and Mexico. And so this is a connection that is worth exploring. A lot of the conversation also right now in the media landscape goes about, follows the Texas Triangle, right? And that's Dallas, Fort Worth, that's Houston, that's Austin, and San Antonio. But if you flip that triangle, it goes to the south, right? And so that's kind of what we're talking about right here, the South Texas Triangle connecting San Antonio and Monterrey, right? David, you want to pick it up?
Yeah, to the point of regionalism, I think that is one of the most interesting points of conversation out there right now. There's a huge global and macro shift away from globalism, which has ran the last 30, 40 years, where you're looking at outsourced jobs, outsourced manufacturing, global supply lines. And that has been a huge part of the rise of China and India and manufacturing in Asia in general. And in a lot of ways, the U.S., from a job perspective and a lot of different ways, has benefited, but also very much been hurt. A lot of our local manufacturing, you look at the Rust Belt, and then you also look at a lot of the ties to the South that have become maybe less important than in the past, where a lot of our fabric between Mexico, NAFTA, then to the larger Latin America, have maybe not been as prioritized as the U.S. has been looking to build relationships with China and cheaper labor sources there, cheaper material sources there. And then, really it feels like COVID has been this major shift and made everybody realize that, one, we've been pretty much assuming there'd be unlimited cheap debt, and then also, fuel prices continuing to be cheap as well. And both of those have really, been put into question as interest rates and material. People are actually realizing how much shipping and logistics costs. If anybody's gotten a Uber Eats order, all of a sudden you're realizing, oh wow, this, it costs $20 for 2 burgers, but then also it's another $25 to get it delivered. And it's, that's that person's time, that's the fuel costs, that's all the financing that Uber raised to make that happen. And, they had been subsidizing those type of costs for a long time because money had been so cheap. And now you're seeing that true cost. And you see that across the board. So now companies are really focusing, and then the war in Ukraine and the questions around our relationship with China, those from more of a national security and more like a trade route type questions, has really thrown a huge wrench and a huge risk factor into the larger business and political environment. And so now you see a lot of focus on redeveloping those original supply routes and chains that had been very North and South American focused, and a lot of manufacturing moving to Mexico, particularly Monterrey, the border region, and that's created a lot of interest. And it's not anything new. I think one of the things that is very interesting is, these things are this is much more of like an excavation project, because all these relationships, all this region has been there. It's just people haven't necessarily been paying attention to it.
Yeah, I think that you ended there by saying people aren't paying attention to it, or they haven't been. So, I think that's one of the things that's really interesting to me about this project is there's so much discussion right now about San Antonio and Austin, and it's the fastest growing corridor in the nation. But these ties have been here for generations, and there's been some political discussion about building connections, particularly with Monterrey, and obviously a lot of people move from one city to the other. But how do you generate interest? How do you generate interest in having people look south? Right. And then also, how do you broaden the discussion around the connections? So it's pretty easy to talk about trade, right? Everyone, NAFTA, USMCA, and all the trucks that go from Laredo up I-35, but there are many more connections, obviously, than simply trade, as important as that is.
Yeah.
So I guess my questions are, how do you kind of turn people's heads, and where do you see these connections beyond simply trade?
Right. Well, you're right. There's a lot of ways to look at this, right? Definitely trade is one. Another one is, if you look at the infrastructure of San Antonio, right? It's clear that it's very different, the south of San Antonio versus the north of San Antonio, right? And so if you extend that outlook to the border, the RGV, for example, you'll notice that actually the south of San Antonio has more in common with the RGV than the north of San Antonio, right? So in terms of infrastructure, I think it's very clear. Also the language, right? It's known as Spanglish. And if you move south, Spanglish will be more heavy than if you start looking north. So that's also another component, right? But it goes beyond the border, also on the Mexican side and all the way to Monterrey. There's a lot of similarities and a lot of cultural shared values between the south of San Antonio, or San Antonio at large, and the north of Mexico. And if you go to Mexico, it's funny because Monterrey has mirrored a lot of the development in Texas. So in terms of urban infrastructure, it's also more similar to San Antonio or United States than the north of Mexico or the south, the central Mexico or the south of Mexico. So that's another angle that I think gets our attention to that region, right? But another thing that is really important, and just touching a little bit on trade, is the fact that the Laredo's bridge right now is the most important bridge in the United States, in air, water, or land, right? More goods are crossing that border than anywhere else in the United States. And so that obviously brings our attention to an array of different opportunities, but also challenges, right? Because 17,000 trucks goes through that border. And, those trucks just go all the way to Austin on the corridor I-35. And that presents, a lot of challenges. And so we have to ask ourselves, how do we want to develop this region so that it provides good quality of life for communities, right? And that's something that we have discussed a lot, and definitely, it's a very, very wide conversation. Moving on, right? Talk about culture. We talk about trade. We talk about language. What would be another one, David?
Well, identity at the core of what gets me excited about this project, and a lot of the research and work that has been done through Urban Future Lab is, it's an identity project. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we spent a couple of years wrestling about is, how do you have an honest conversation about a region? Who has the authority to talk about a region. It's so many different perspectives. There's so many different viewpoints. Where do you start that conversation? And so one thing that emerged in our conversations is it needs to be more of a kaleidoscope. It can't just be one top-down narrative that gets forced, because that's not authentic. But this op-ed project and this format allows us to curate a multitude of conversations that can paint a picture of something and so from different perspectives. And so that's what I'm excited, as we walk through this series, as we talk about, different topics, but also from different perspectives. Hopefully that paints the picture of this complicated region. And that's what's going to get people to pay attention, is to put a name behind something where, the Texas Triangle, it has a brand. And because of that, people are able to identify the value, be able to talk about it, write about it. Whereas South Texas and Northern Mexico, one of the geographic features about our region is we're a frontier. We're kind of this borderland, no man's land, which gives us a very rich and dynamic culture, but also it's hard to pinpoint because we're kind of on the fringe of the United States, but then Northern Mexico is on the fringe of Mexico. Mexico City is the cultural hub, and this whole area, the whole reason, the country of Mexico invited settlers from America is they were having trouble populating it. This was the edge and this was the frontier, and they were like, they were having trouble getting people to come here in the first place. And so I think because of that, we're this blend and we're this, mix of things that hasn't ever, in a lot of ways hasn't gotten, or we've struggled to find that identity and clearly articulate that identity. And so through this project, we hope to better construct that identity so people can talk about it, so people can start to pay attention to it, and so it doesn't get left behind. I mean, one of the things in our data that we really see is that, especially when you look at lower income communities or communities of color, there are holes in data. Whether you look at credit scores or bank accounts or census tracts, and people counted on the census, the established ways of collecting data often miss some of the people who are most vulnerable. And then as the people in Washington or people in Mexico City look to allocate resources, they don't have the complete picture of that data. Or a bank, if they're saying, where do I allocate capital and branches? And they look at deposit numbers, and then they look at the South Side and don't see deposits, then they're going to look at Stone Oak. But that's not a factor of there could be money in that community, but maybe the culture is not put it in a bank. Maybe the culture is hold cash or do something different or send that money to relatives. And so there's not an accurate reflection of reality. And so in South Texas, one thing we've noticed is there's a very big disconnect between perception and reality. And the perception is, too poor, too minority, no value there. Why would I spend time there? Why would I grow my business there? Why would I invest there? Why would I want to go visit there? Versus the reality is it's an incredible place with incredible talent, incredible people, incredible opportunities. And so we want to really shape that identity and help bring that conversation to front.
Let me double click real quick, just on identity, right? Because when we talk about identity in the framework of the Texas Triangle, right, or Texas in general, every large city in Texas has an identity or is known for something, right? If you look at Dallas, that's finance center, right? If you look at Houston, it's energy. If you look at Austin, it's technology. And when you talk about San Antonio, it's undefined, right? It's unknown. You could talk about cybersecurity or military city, right? Or health, but depending on who you talk to, there'll be a different answer. I think that's kind of one of the main reasons and the main points of why this op-ed is important. It's because we want to create a space for those conversations to happen, right? From people who are experts in their field and who have something to say, but more importantly, who have a vision of what we could become in the near future. Because another very, very important fact is that Texas is poised for growth in the next 30 to 40 years, right? Texas has, in a way, energy security. It has resource security. in regional terms, it has a great outlook on the future. And so it is this time, I think, where young generations have to engage in conversations with older generations and try to identify what are the common ground that we have and what are some of the traits that make us who we are as a city in order to define our next 30 to 40 years. And so I think that's the opportunity that we are pursuing here. We really want to have those conversations and get ideas from people who are at the forefront of different industries, and to try to imagine and visualize what the future looks like for us in San Antonio. And at an individual level as well, I think both the pandemic, but also the rise of digital infrastructure and the digital economy has created an opportunity for people to move, from the border to San Antonio or from Monterrey to San Antonio. So there's a lot more movement of people, right? Myself, I'm from Brownsville, Texas. I was born in Brownsville. I grew up in a city in Mexico, in Tamaulipas, in Ciudad Victoria. But then I, went to school as well in the UTRGV, right? At the University of Texas Pan American, now UTRGV, and ended up in San Antonio. And that journey has been going on for years. A lot of people have gone through that journey. And so in a way, we also want to create, a vision that allows more people to follow that journey so that more ideas can flourish in both in San Antonio, in the RGV, and in Monterrey as well. So we want to create a collective vision for the region.
And it's not an either or. When we talk about the Texas Triangle, like that is an incredible asset for San Antonio, for South Texas. Austin is incredible. The growth that's happened there, the dynamism, the brand, the global brand that Austin has built is amazing. So I don't think our position is, we shouldn't pay attention to Austin. We shouldn't pay attention to
definitely.
the north. No, it's a huge asset. However, as we think to define ourselves in that Texas Triangle, when you look at Austin, Houston, Dallas-Fort Worth, San Antonio, how does San Antonio relate to those cities? And in a lot of ways, we have struggled to find good answers. As San Antonio companies look to grow in Austin, Austin's like, what do we need you for? We're Austin. Who are you? And so, that Texas Triangle, that's a region of 18 million people, incredibly dynamic. However, this South Triangle, this South Texas Triangle is a region of 15 million people and has the potential to be incredibly dynamic, create a lot of socioeconomic mobility, and especially in a world that's asking for diversity, asking for people of color to find opportunity. This is where people of color are. It's one of the most. When you look at population growth, there's just huge wave of young people. When you look at the next generation of talent and America, it's going to be coming from places like South Texas. And so if you're able to really foster that region, if we can put resources towards the South Texas region, all of a sudden Austin and San Antonio become the center or the nexus of a much larger region, more of an hourglass of 30 plus million people that could be incredibly dynamic, that could connect North and South America in a lot of ways that Miami's positioned themselves as this connector city, this place of confluence where Latin American companies are headquartering in Miami to get access to North America. North American companies are doing vice versa to get access. It's like, why is San Antonio not playing that role when you look at Central America, South America?
That's a good question. And I hope that sparks, I hope the op-ed project sparks more conversation around that. Beto, you're a tech entrepreneur. And part of this op-ed project deals with tech and broadband infrastructure, and also just a startup culture, right? So what does, Austin obviously has a great reputation as a place for tech and startup and innovation. When you look at the region, the South Texas Triangle region, so again, San Antonio, Monterrey, what exists here to support a tech startup culture, and what needs to build, and is there a mindset that crosses international borders that to foster innovation, across tech and whatever should be developed along the lines of programming, AI, and so on. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's also something that we've been looking at for quite some time. And me personally, I've had the opportunity to, address that situation from multiple perspectives. But first of all, I think one of the opportunities here is that both on the Mexican side of the border and on the U.S. side of the border in Texas, we have a young population, right? And so that's the first factor, is that we have a young population that has a lot of potential to be turned into the workforce of tomorrow, through proper investment and education, to create those opportunities for companies to, have access to talent that can help them grow, right? That brings us to broadband, right? And so in terms of broadband infrastructure, I think there's still a lot of work to do, but I know, and one of the op-eds we'll talk about that, is that the RGV has been getting federal grants to invest in infrastructure. And so that's definitely creating some great success cases of small cities investing in digital infrastructure so that they can have more opportunities to prepare the youth, right, young people. And so that's key. Now, in terms of specific examples as well of how the region is uniting to create more opportunities, you can look at Geekdom, for example, or the Alamo Angels. They've taken a very active approach to building connections with the RGV, with Brownsville in particular, sharing resources and sharing knowledge. For example, I think they've opened an accelerator program together to provide support and training and access to a larger network, San Antonio and Austin as well, for entrepreneurs in the Valley, in Brownsville. And so activities like those or partnerships like those will create more opportunities for young people to have the resources, the necessary resources to be successful as a tech entrepreneur. Because when I started my first company about 5 years ago here in San Antonio, it was very hard for us to get access to the resources that we needed, in terms of talent, in terms of investment, in terms of support or knowledge as well, right? It's a small ecosystem. And in order for us to get connected to a larger network, we will have to go to, Austin or Houston or Dallas to be able to tap into, a larger network. Now that's changing. Right, there's a lot of successful entrepreneurs, and it's a good opportunity to highlight. There's been very successful entrepreneurs here in the city that have come from the RGV as well. Float Me, they've been a great success story, and the founder, he's from McAllen, right? There's other companies like that, and so also from that regional perspective, that this is only going to make easier for entrepreneurs to be successful. So I think that's been my experience. Another, just to add one more point is, you could actually collaborate and find great talent in Monterrey, in the RGV. And now that remote work has been, the new law of the land, you could also tap into that potential and those resources to power your company. So there's a wide variety of elements that can support an entrepreneur starting, their own company at this time, just by focusing on this region.
And just also to add, the cities, if you look at the last 10 years, the cities that have really thrived as entrepreneurial ecosystems, tech hubs, have been those that have invested in being a great city. And that is really focused on urban amenities and urban lifestyle. So if you look at Austin or San Francisco, New York, Miami, these are all places where people want to live. And when you're trying to build a business, when tech entrepreneurs and businesses are looking, especially in this post-COVID world, it's all about talent, and it's all about thinking about, where does that talent want to be? How do I retain? How do I attract people back to the office? How do I build a corporate culture? And that's going to be heavily driven by lifestyle, especially in a world where people can work from anywhere they want to with a computer. How do you even keep them in this country? And so San Antonio, I think, has done an amazing job going back to the days of Mayor Castro of really investing in our urban core. The Riverwalk and the entire Riverwalk extension has been incredible. What the Pearl has done. That's what brought me back to San Antonio. I left here I went to go to UT and then moved to New York City, and I never thought I'd come back to San Antonio. And it took coming back and visiting and seeing the Pearl, seeing what San Antonio could be, and to even open that door for me to want to come back. And so, really continuing to invest in that. San Pedro Creek is amazing, but we're still in the early chapters of that. We need density up and activation around that creek. The Riverwalk, can we continue to double down? Can we figure out public transit? I'm really hoping that VIA's new advanced rapid transit system can be a success to prove that San Antonio can have rapid transit and you don't have to have a car to live here. Mm-hmm. That would be an amazing proof point. But we need to start doing these things to become a competitive city for talent that could live anywhere. And also for the rest of the, Laredo is thinking about that. Brownsville, Elon Musk with grants of, I think it was $10 million to beautify and grow the downtown. And all the cities in the valley are thinking about this. How do we activate our urban core to be attractive? Because talk about brain drain, the valley, Laredo, San Antonio, we've had incredible people grow up here, and the challenge has been, how do we retain them? How do we keep those folks here to continue doing great things here versus going to New York or London or San Francisco or Los Angeles because they think they have to?
Yeah.
Do you think do you think that San Antonio and has I guess the answer is already self-evident given the Op-Ed project, but has San Antonio successfully carved out a place as a leading city for this region, for a leading like a destination for young Latinos in particular, obviously young people overall, but just looking at our demographics, young Latinos? Has San Antonio successfully marketed that or done that?
Well, I think in terms of San Antonio being in a leadership position, I think that's an important aspect of this Op-Ed. And in general, an important aspect in the relationship between the South region, right, the South Texas Triangle region. Talking with colleagues and participants in the Op-Ed series from Laredo, they've said that San Antonio has always been, sort of quote unquote the leader of the region, right? And so it's important San Antonio to step up and advertise itself as a city of opportunities for young people. We definitely, I think that we need to do a better job, in that regard. But I think it's doing a good job because there are success stories, like you pointed out. This Op-Ed is one of those opportunities. David mentioned, right, and we went over some of the success cases for entrepreneurs from the Valley that have moved to San Antonio. And I think San Antonio is doing a better job retaining that talent, providing opportunities, getting them plugged in, which is one of the main, the greatest opportunities in this city are related to how accessible people are, right? And that's, kind of a trope for the city. It's like, we're a community. It's easy to talk to people. You can get plugged in really quick. I think that's a very, very, attractive proposition for people who are ambitious, who are driven by innovation, who want to create change in their communities. And San Antonio offers that. And I think that's a brand that we should export, more actively to the South, and become that city where if you have talent, if you have resources, you can come here and you'll find the support to, grow your initiatives rather than having to find success or resources somewhere else, which I think has been the clearest path for a lot of people. They come to San Antonio, they do, one or two great things, they start their companies, and then they follow the money. Or, it's part of this is also something that has been as a negotiation strategy by a lot of investors, is like, well, I'll invest in you and your company, but you have to move, to closer to where I am, because investors are not moving to San Antonio. Not yet, but we want more of that. And that's what Alamo Angels, for example, is trying to do. So I think San Antonio does provide a great platform for people who, have, that are eager to bring change and to improve their communities. I think we're in a good path, but I think we should be more bullish on the idea and put a lot more resources behind it.
Yeah, and I think we need to think really hard about what leadership means in this instance. And I think one thing, San Antonio can't be in this solely for San Antonio. It needs to be a friend to cities that maybe, the city of San Antonio has not, not the city, but just the larger, San Antonio has not been as focused on building relationships with Valley or Laredo, maybe taking those built-in relationships for granted and focusing more on Austin or focusing on Dallas or New York, whatever that is, DC. That's constantly cultivating these relationships to the north versus, really we need to build trust to the south, showing we care about this region. We want everybody to be successful. We want your cities, we want your areas to be, it's abundance mindset, the rising tide raises all boats. And so I think we need to just really be thoughtful there. And that looks like San Antonio investing in these regions, in these cities, San Antonio being a political advocate in Austin, saying, Laredo is the biggest port in the country. We need resources there. We need to go to DC and advocate for resources for Laredo. That helps Laredo. That helps San Antonio. Same thing with the Valley. The whole border infrastructure is completely under-equipped for the amount of traffic that it's going to be getting when we think about water or, resiliency, Corpus Christi talking about water desalination plant. Like we need to actively fight for the needs of the rest of the region and truly be a leader, than versus just looking out for ourselves.
Sure.
That's right.
Well, I think my last question is, recognizing that every community is unique, right? Every city, every town is its own special place and has its own local dynamics, right? But what do you think when you look at this region, what is shared between, you're talking about Monterrey, San Antonio, the Valley, Laredo, Corpus Christi, what do these communities share in common? Like what are the things that are linking these communities that allow this flow of culture or goods, trade, ideas, infrastructure, talent? What binds everybody together in the South Triangle?
Right. Well, I think definitely, DNA, right? I think there is a number that 1 in 6 Americans are genetically connected to Mexico. So if you think about, where we are, that's probably a little bit higher, right? I mean, in San Antonio, you have areas of the city that are known as, for example, Sonterra is called Monterrey, right? You have a lot of people from Monterrey.
Right.
Right. And so I think demographically, there is a unity that, in terms of where we are and who we are that binds us and connects us. So I think that's one. Another one is, culturally, just on Friday, I was at the Pearl and they had a wonderful event that was organized by the city and the Foreign Relations Department in Mexico. And they brought amazing, dancers and conjuntos that showcase, the cultural heritage of the Mexican American culture or the Mexican culture. And while I was looking at this, I was thinking to myself, it's like, this is amazing. It's like, I won't get this in Austin or
Mexican Independence Day.
Exactly, Mexican Independence Day. And, it's like you could feel a little piece of Mexico in this city, and that's shared across the city, at large. And so I think that's another element that binds this region together, that you could be in San Antonio, which is, a good sized city. It has a great urban core, and you can still feel like, there's a tie with Mexico. The same with, industry. Well, we know trade connects our region. The I-35 corridor is like the spinal cord of trade between Mexico and the United States. And so that also connects us. And in general, I think those are some of the main components that binds us together, that adds flavor to who we are, and that we're a young region that has a lot of potential to grow. And I think that's the exciting part of about it, is like right now we're kind of still waking up to what's happening in the world, and we're finally the history is aligning to serve us for the next 30 to 40 years. And it's exciting to be in this position right now where a lot of things can happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's always the Spurs. So,
absolutely, yeah.
I think it's this global shift, and I think nearshoring is probably the most prominent aspect, but it's bigger than that. But this global macro shift, consolidating supply chains, the new renewed focus on kind of North America, Mexico is, I think, a once in a generation opportunity, not just for San Antonio, but for everybody in the region. And I think it's something that people are aware of, but I hope that we all understand the gravity of what's happening and the amount of resources that are coming this way. And the question is just, how are we going to grow? And I hope we grow well. I hope we're thinking about sustainability and education and socioeconomic mobility. And how do we, how does our culture, how do we respect and preserve our culture, but then also evolve with it? I think that's a question that San Antonio has always struggled with, and we will continue to as a larger region. And but it's a big deal. The amount of focus that nearshoring and this global shift is bringing, just an incredible amount of resources to this area, from Monterrey all the way up to Laredo, San Antonio, Austin. And how do we organize around that? How do we plan effectively? How do we allocate resources in a responsible way to make the most of this opportunity? So I think everybody, and Corpus Christi, Houston, those are going to be major ports. I mean, they already are. Houston's a monster, but it's a huge opportunity for Corpus Christi. It's a huge opportunity for the Valley. And so how do we all collectively organize to make the most of it?
It seems like, in a way, we won the lottery, and it's either, we have to find out if we're going to be the ones that burn it fast and ended up missing our opportunity to make it big, or we're smart and, we make the right investments and we make sure that everyone's taken care of, in terms of our communities. And so I think that's the big question, right? Is like, okay, now we're here. We have a great opportunity ahead of us. What's it going to be, right? Like, what's the leadership of the cities in the region thinking about, and how can we come in and support those efforts?
Yeah, I think those are all the big questions, right? And folks watching, we're going to have commentaries on trade, tech, economic development, environmental concerns, innovation, demographic change, a whole series of op-eds coming out that will take on all these topics. And, my thanks to Beto and David, both for being here and really taking the lead on this, reaching out to the writers and going over different drafts and fostering what should be a really interesting conversation. So
absolutely,
thanks to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Josh.
Express News is an awesome platform to do this with, and we're excited.
Awesome. Yeah, talking about, opening up doors. Thank you guys.
Yeah.
It's been really helpful.
It's been awesome.
Yeah.
So thanks.